QIMR Berghofer acknowledges the traditional and cultural custodians of the lands, waters and seas across Queensland, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. We support the cultural knowledge, determination and commitment of First Nations communities in caring for health and well-being for millennia.
Welcome to QIMR Berghofer's 80th anniversary podcast. I'm Claire Blake, and we're celebrating 8 decades of bold ideas, real science, and the brilliant men and women who made it happen. We did start in a leaky old army hut, and now we're tackling cancer, decoding the brain, tracking infectious diseases, and rewriting what's possible in medicine. We'll dive into the true stories, funny, messy, inspiring, from the people who made it all happen, and those carrying the torch into the future, because science isn't just labs and data, it's human. And it's happening right here. Today, Professor Nick Martin, a pioneer in human genetics, long-time leader here, he's built the world's most influential twin research program, exploring the genetic basis of mental health, behaviour and complex traits, shaping the research culture in Brisbane. Professor Martin has really played a key role in advancing genetic science globally. And in this episode, we'll talk about his journey, the people, the projects that shaped his work. And Nick, your reflections on QIMR's legacy as we turn 80. Thank you for joining us. You were in America.
That's right.
You were doing pretty well. You were pretty happy, but you wanted to raise your kids back here.
True. We hadn't had children then, but I was at a point of looking at the jobs in nature every week, and just a matter of interest. I wasn't anywhere near ready to come back to Australia. I'd only been there 3.5 years, and then this advertisement appeared at QIMR for a genetic epidemiologist, which is one of the things I called myself. It could have been written for me, although I knew no one here. So of course I had to apply, and the next thing they were on the phone to me and saying, when can we meet, when can you come out, and so we had very fruitful discussions, but I really was playing for time. So just to slow them down, I said, I couldn't come unless there was a job for my wife as well, and explained what she did. Next day they're on the phone saying, we've got a job for your wife as well. So at that point, I absolutely had to apply and take it. And
But they had no idea how good that package deal wouldn't turn out.
Well. I mean, it has. I mean, you've already talked to my wife, Georgia Chenoweth-Strench, who's established a very successful breast cancer research program here. Anyway, all of that was engineered by Bob McLennan and Chev Kitson, who was, a great director here and really an inspiring character. And Bob, who is a straight environmental epidemiologist, had the foresight to see that the direction was moving towards genetics. You had to take some account of genetics, and there was no genetics at the Institute, at least not that sort of genetics. I think that that showed a lot of foresight.
Just stepping back a bit, what drew you to genetics initially?
Well, my father was a geneticist, but I think that what appealed to him appealed to me. It's quite mathematical. I like maths, I like numbers, I like statistics, although I'm not particularly good at it, but I like it well enough to, and I just love that in genetics, you're actually able to use straight mathematical inference to draw incredible conclusions about biology. The whole understanding of chromosomes and inheritance and so on all comes from understanding the mathematical properties of breeding. It all comes from Mendel, and later on Darwin and so on. And that always appealed to me, as it appealed to my father and to our daughter, who has also gone in this direction. And it's that combination of maths and biology that is most appealing. Yeah.
It's genetic.
It is, yes.
So when you arrived here, what sort of work was going on? And you really could see where the changes needed to be. Can you take us through that?
Well, one of the main foci here, of course, the main focus historically was tropical diseases. That was still very strong at that time, and still is a strong strand here. It was Chev Kitson, I think, who introduced an interest in cancer. and in particular melanoma, because of course Brisbane is the melanoma capital of the world, a very dubious distinction. I knew nothing of melanoma, and my interest was in behaviour. So the sort of deal I made with Chev and with Bob, nothing was ever written down, but I've stuck to the letter during my career to spend, about half of my time on melanoma and related things and half on the other stuff that interests me.
We've recorded a few in this series already, and Chev Kidson just keeps coming up as the person who had the vision to really expand what we were doing here, and his support seems extraordinary. Is that how you remember it?
Absolutely, and he had real charisma, and he loved science, and he's really interested in science, very broad. He has an intellect, just delightful. I mean, he had this almost obsession with Asia, and used to earbash us about that a little bit too often for my liking. But that was, I think, showed a lot of foresight as well, that we do need to be engaged with Asia, and so he was behind getting many of the research projects in Asia going, some of which continue to this day.
I know coming back to Brisbane for you was a bit of a culture shock, and your plan was not originally to stay in Brisbane.
It sure was. I mean, when we moved back, the building was not down here on Hurston Road. It was up in the middle of the hospital, what is now I think the clinical genetics building, right in the middle of the hospital. And that was actually a relatively new building, but there wasn't room for me. Epidemiology was parked in some old Nissen huts up the hill near in the garden of the nurses' quarters. So for the first year I was there, there we were in these old wooden huts with no air conditioning, and during the heat of summer, and it sort of felt very 1940s. That didn't worry me. I mean, and that was while they were converting the animal house on one of the levels of the old building up there for us to move in. And when we did that, the quarters were very nice. But I do remember after a couple of months being there and, living in these sort of rather hovel conditions, and there was a very sort of parochial mentality. Every time I wanted to make an international phone call, I had to get clearance from about 3 people. And so I do remember going out and sitting under the poinciana tree with my head in my hands, thinking, oh my God, what have I done coming to this place? But it just got better. And every time I complained, and I'm not a complainer, but they'd ask me, and I've mentioned something that I wasn't happy with, and they'd immediately fix it. Chev and Bob. I mean, immediately would say, "Oh, we can do something." So I complained about the phone call situation. "Oh, we can fix that. You don't have to go through all that stuff anymore. You can just, dial directly." And so, what can you say in that situation? Originally, I only intended to stay here a couple of years and then move on south, but we just grew to love Brisbane and grew to love the Institute, actually, because it was just so accommodating, allowing us to expand the way we wanted to.
There was such camaraderie.
Well, that building up there was built for 80 people. And by the time we moved out down into this building here in 1991, I think the Institute was 240 people. And of course, now it's 800 or 1,000 or something like that. So it just kept growing and growing. But we were just packed in by like sardines at the end. But even so, the numbers were smaller. It was possible to know everyone. We'd just have a barbecue every last Friday every month, and everyone would just go out, with barbecue chops and sausages, but happy hour on Friday night. Well, that still goes on, but the sort of monthly barbecue, which was very socialising, you started to accumulate a group, make a few appointments, and some of which were successful, and others weren't. And students started to come along, and it just sort of gradually grew. One important thing was getting small grants from the Queensland Cancer Fund, which enabled, and they were quite small, $30,000, $50,000, something like that, but they were enough to get a project going. And having got it going, you could then go to NHMRC and get bigger grants. And then on the back of that, we much later sort of started getting NIH grants as well. I always emphasize to my students the importance of just trying to get your foot in the door with small foundation grants if they exist. I don't know how many of those still exist, but it used to be moderately easy to get those. I mean, the whole grants game now is just so vicious. It's just so...
Would your advice be the same now, because it's so much harder?
you've got to start somewhere. And, you don't just go straight from nothing to an NIH grant. You've got to build up there slowly. So, yes, apply for everything you can. Apply for, small foundation grants. There are some now nice starter grants within the Institute, which I think are a great innovation. And go for those.
Bringing on students is always risky, and I just want to go back to that. Some successful, some unsuccessful. Are there any students that stand out that have gone on to do really terrific things and you're just so pleased to have?
A number of them. I mean, I'm very proud of the students I've had a hand in supervising. I didn't always have sole supervision, but no, I'm absolutely. David Duffy is really an outstanding. I always say I'm his student. I mean, I learned more from him than he ever learned from me.
What sort of things do you learn from a student?
He reads statistics books for fun. So, most incredible authority on any difficult statistical problem I take to David. He's a real scholar, real scholar. Unfortunately, he doesn't tick all the boxes that the administrators would like him. Like, he refuses to fill in leave forms and things like that, and gets persecuted for it. But in terms of pure scholarship, he's just unequaled. And I've had other great successes. Sarah Medlin, who's still here. David Evans, who was for a long time in England but is now back at UQ now. Outstanding. Michelle Luciano, who's Professor of Psychology in Edinburgh, studying outstandingly well. I'm afraid I'm going to miss some. Manel Ferreira, he was the most outstanding PhD student. Well, now he is got a very senior position in Regeneron, which is the top genomics company in the world, and he's in there determining policy and on the most incredibly exciting project. I mean, his annual budget is larger than the total research budget in Australia across NHMRC, ARC, and all other government schemes.
No envy whatsoever.
No envy. Yeah, I think his personal research budget is $2.8 billion US. So, yes, I'm immensely proud of these people.
Was it much easier when it was a smaller institute? You had those social occasions, you worked together, you played together. Does that make collaborating much easier?
I'm not one for just wasting time in small talk, talking about the football. I mean, I like to talk about work, and I like to talk with other people who talk about work. And when you do that, you have to say, oh, well, we could actually do something on that. Many of my collaborations have started that way. I mean, that's why I'm a great believer in going to meetings and international meetings, because, I mean, I used to mark the success of an international or of a meeting by the number of new collaborations I'd started. And I would hardly ever come home empty-handed without starting something. So I'm immensely collaborative. I must have published with thousands of different people. Many of those came from just from conversations at mixers at conferences or over, drinks or dinners or whatever like that. Often, the person you see next to at dinner. Yeah, that's how my stuttering project began, at a conference dinner with Melanie Barlow. That was at Gene Mappers in Geelong. And I was sitting next to Melanie Barlow, who's at the WeHi in Melbourne, and she was talking about doing the genetics of stuttering with a total focus, like everyone else in Melbourne, on single gene disorders. And I said, but Melanie, it's bound to be polygenic. Everything's polygenic. The way to do that is with a GWAS study, a genome-wide association study, and we need a large sample, and we can only do that by a nationwide campaign, teaming up with other groups of speech pathologists around the place. And anyway, it came to pass, and so we've now done that project and starting to get some results.
Thinking about that, the extraordinary twin registry program, your collaborative skills must have really come to the fore there. That is just huge. And no matter where you go, I imagine in Brisbane, Australia, and the world, you'll find someone who says, hey, I was part of your program.
Well, I mean, because I'm passionate about genetics and think everything's genetic to some extent, the most powerful way to actually demonstrate that is the classical twin study, which involves comparing the similarity of identical with non-identical twins, because the identical twins have all their genes in common. The non-identical twins have got only half their genes in common. And so with a little bit of simple algebra, you can actually calculate the proportion of variation for any trait that is genetic. I did my first twin study actually as an honours student when I was at the University of Adelaide. That led on to doing my PhD on that topic in England, in Birmingham. Lots of people were publishing twin studies then, but they were sort of pathetic little samples of 50 or 80 or 100 or sometimes 24 or something like that, and giving totally erratic results. And I said, well, that's probably because they're too small. Well, how big do they need to be? So I did the first statistical power calculation to show how big twin samples needed to be to give reliable results. And the answer was, you're pretty much wasting your time with anything under about 600 pairs. It depends what question you're asking, but generally speaking, the larger the better. So that was the impetus for me to come back to Australia and start the Australian Twin Register, which I did in 1978. And I ran that for the first 5 years when we recruited the first 15,000 pairs, and did my first twin study out of Canberra in 1980. Then I went to the US to chase Georgia, and I already said, we could only stay in the US for 3 or 4 years if we're ready to come back to Australia.
And the twin study started in the 70s, still going now. Enormous data and information coming out of that. Who's going to do that when you retire?
Oh, that's a very good question. Actually, the meeting after this is considering exactly that question. The question now arises as to where it's run from, and so we're going to make a bid to move it back here. But I mean, that depends upon having younger people. Sarah Medlin's the most obvious, but there are a couple of postdocs as well, Brittany and Michelle, who have expressed interest. I think it would be great to move it back here.
Was there other things that were a turning point in your career?
Well, in my career, yes, certainly. I mean, the most critical thing was, I can remember, it was the day that Princess Anne got married. I'm a great royalist, very unfashionable these days. But anyway, so I was in London as a new student at Oxford, actually, which had always been my dream of the place I'd do my PhD. But I wasn't really, although I loved Oxford, I wasn't really enthralled with the project I'd been given or the supervisor. On the day after Princess Anne's wedding, I went up to see Lyndon Eves in Birmingham, who had written several papers on the analysis of twin data, developed all these new statistical methods, which I thought were just absolutely fantastic. So I had to go and meet Lyndon. So I caught a train up from London, got a taxi to the university and met Lyndon. And I think it was at 9 a.m. We did not draw breath until I got back in a taxi at 5 p.m. And it was quite obvious that that's where I had to do my PhD, and he had to be my supervisor. So that changed absolutely everything. And
the expansion of the program here was a turning point for so many other people around here. I know Professor Adele Green credits you with an enormous part in her trial in Nambour.
Well, I mean, all I did was to lend a hand, really, in that. But I mean, later on, and she was always a bit sceptical about the genetic part. So what I brought to the study of melanoma, as I said, I'd sort of more or less made a promise that I would work on that. I've always been more interested in continuous traits than diseases, affected, unaffected, all or nothing diseases. Since melanomas most often develop from moles, common moles on the skin, I thought that one way of getting at the genetics of melanoma would be through the genetics of moliness. So that's why I started the Brisbane longitudinal twin study, and that was with a little grant from the Cancer Council. That was to recruit 12-year-old twins in the southeast Queensland and to bring them in and count their moles and measure their skin colour and their hair colour and all the other melanoma risk factors. And we started doing that in 1992, and we only stopped a few years ago, 2016. So it ran for 25 years. We recruited over the years, I think it was something like 2,500 pairs of twins in southeast Queensland. And then, of course, after a while, when you're making a whole effort to bring the twins in, it's a quite expensive business, and you've got to find parking for them and blah, blah, blah. Think, what else could I do with them while they're here? And so we started to add on some questionnaires about personality and then about mental health and various other things. And it sort of grew like Topsy. All of those extensions have proved to be very, very beneficial. and contribute to the whole mental health project. Yeah.
Those your fingerprints are all over every one of our pillars of research.
Well, I guess one of my hallmarks has always been, what can I piggyback on this? How can we add value to a study that's always going on? And yeah, I'm still doing that. Yeah, that's the part of it I really love. Yeah.
Massive change from that original building to 3 buildings and collaboration, the internet, email. Are the changes all been good or all challenging?
Oh, I think so. I think so. I mean, I remember, in the old Nissan hut when I first got to QIMR, after being there a couple of months, somebody said, "Oh, there's this thing called BitNet, whereby you can send a message to a collaborator," and everyone was using BitNet, which was extremely cumbersome and ugly and so on and so on. But that was the beginning of email. 1986, I can remember it quite precisely. Up to that point, everybody was using telex. I expect a lot of young people don't even know what telex is anymore, but noisy machines you had in the corner of the room that at certain points in time would chatter, and out would come a message that someone had typed on the other side of the world, extremely inefficient. So, but growth of the internet has just been amazing.
Although you were cursing it when we walked in this morning.
Oh, well, I mean, I spend my whole day on it. That's what I do. But that's because I'm immensely collaborative. I mean, I'm just all the time, feeding national, international collaborations, and yeah, that's what I do.
How do you feel about the future for QIMR Berghofer in the next 80 years?
I don't think you ever get to it's like the idiot who talked about the end of history. There's no such thing as the end of science, and there's no such thing as the end of medical science. The questions just, keep evolving, keep getting better and better. And I mean, our job is to stay apace of that. And I've always said that, I suppose I'm partly talking about myself, but I'm a great believer in appointing 35-year-olds, which is how old I was when I came here. Cast your eyes around the world. And take a bet on the people you think, on the people in their mid-30s you think are really going to make it. And then we've got all sorts of age to do that now. I'm a big fan of the M index, which is the H index divided by a number of years since you started publishing. But you just appoint the people who are best at that. They've got to have a bit of personality as well. And you have to put your trust in them.
You feel like 35-year-olds have got enough life experience.
Exactly. That's what I believe we should be doing, yeah.
What do you think will be the biggest achievement in the next 10 to 20 years here? What are you hoping really comes off?
Well, I mean, we're always talking about the outcome of our research being to uncover pathways which will lead to new medications. That's a great pious hope. Out there in the world, in other fields, I think particularly neurology, there are some examples of that. I think there's some examples in cancer, but I don't think we've got any examples of that yet in psychiatry. But I do believe that that's possible. And so that's what I would like to see as one of the developments to come out of this. I mean, we never pretended that this would be other than a long slog. You're starting from almost nowhere. I mean, the amount we've learnt about genetics of complex disease and the underlying neurochemistry in the last 10 years is just incredible. But one couldn't really say it's led to a whole rash of new treatments yet. But I think they'll come. And the drug companies certainly think they will, because they're investing in it like mad. And Regeneron, which I spoke about earlier, I mean, they're investing hugely, totally in this area.
And they only do that when they're pretty sure they're going
They're
to
not going to be throwing their money there if they don't think this is going to fail.
Do you think you might stay in Brisbane now, Nick?
I keep saying they have to carry me out in a box. I love Brisbane. We've grown to really, I mean, I'm from Adelaide and I love Adelaide too. It's my hometown. But we've really come to love Brisbane. It's just love the climate here and just the whole feel of the place. It's got the advantages of Sydney, but not the disadvantages. I think.
Well, happy anniversary. You've been here for a good chunk of our 80 years.
40 years next year.
Congratulations. And if you'd like to find out more about Professor Nick Martin, his team and their work, QIMRB.edu.au. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you very much.